Was Demarcus Robinson the right wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens to sign? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. That includes over on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. And we're back here, a midweek edition of the show here on Wednesday, gearing up for week 3 of the 2022 preseason. Baltimore facing off against the Washington Commanders. And we have a jam-packed episode here for you today. We're going to be diving into just Ravens news, notes, and quotes in the first segment. Baltimore had to get down from 85 to 80 players. We'll talk about the moves they made there, who returned to practice on Tuesday. John Harbaugh providing some updates on some injured players who are returning or have gotten injured already. So we'll dive into all that in the first segment. In the second segment, I do want to dive into Demarcus Robinson. We really haven't had the opportunity to talk a lot about him because the news ended up breaking-ish on Friday with the expected signing, Baltimore making it official on Tuesday. And I wanted to dive into just if he was the right player for them to sign at this point at the position. I've been very vocal in saying that, yeah, I think Baltimore should sign a veteran. They do sign a veteran, but was he the right veteran for them to sign? We'll talk about that in the second segment. Then on the final segment, we'll dive into mailbag questions, talking about the rookie class and more. So again, tons to dive into. If you hear this on YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, like the video so you can see my face in my background every Monday through Friday. Thank you to everybody sure to subscribe. And if you haven't already, we do put out daily Ravens content 5 days per week. So if you want Ravens news, analysis, updates, and everything Baltimore Ravens football, we have you covered here. Also, same thing in audio form. Thank you for tuning in, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Thank you so much. We really have a ton of content that we put out here, and we're going to be diving into a ton as the regular season kicks off. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at KSRicker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. But let's now dive into our content. Let's start off with this Ravens news, notes, and quote segment. We'll first start off with the players that Baltimore ended up letting go of, or just the moves they ended up making. So Baltimore had to get down from 85 to 80 players by Tuesday at 4 p.m. And actually for them, it was 86 because the Demarcus Robinson signing did count for a player on the roster. So they had to make 6 types of moves. Baltimore placing running back Gus Edwards on the physically unable to perform list, the reserve list. So they moved him over to the reserve list. And that used to mean that you would miss 6 games. You saw that with Rashad Bateman last year, but now it means only 4 games. So Edwards will first be eligible to play in week 5. And obviously he's working hard to get back. So hopefully that will be the case. And we'll talk about Edwards again in a few minutes. Baltimore also moving on from wide receivers Jalen Moore, Bailey Gaither, Slade Bolden, who they released with an injury designation. Also offensive tackle Jared Jones-Smith and inside linebacker Diego Fagot. So Baltimore moving on from those 5 guys, moving Gus Edwards to the reserve physically unable to perform list. Yeah, it's moves that Baltimore does have to make, and it's unfortunate because these guys all worked really hard for these opportunities. Hopefully they're able to latch on somewhere else. Maybe, that they come back to Baltimore on the practice squad. Who knows? But that's the big-ish cut down day before we get to the final 53-man roster. So it's something to watch out for. Baltimore still has a ton of depth, but it's just this benchmark cut down days that the NFL's put in here in these past couple of seasons, which I think have been, just able to get the team down. You're able to figure out who you want, who you don't want, etc. So that's something to keep in mind here. Also, though, 2 guys returning to practice on Tuesday, which was really important. Both center Tyler Linderbaum and wide receiver Tylan Wallace. Linderbaum got rolled up on in practice a couple weeks ago, injured his foot, hasn't played in the preseason, so hopefully he'll be able to suit up in week 3 against the Commanders. They also have Tylan Wallace, who was injured early in that week 1 game against Tennessee in the preseason, so hopefully he's able to work back. And very good news on that front for the Ravens, but they did not get back Ronnie Stanley or Tyus Bowser, so depending on whether you expected them back or not, could just be, all right, it's another day without him, or it could be bad news depending on, again, whether you thought they'd be back at this point. But again, just something to monitor as the regular season does creep closer and closer. We're coming up on week 1 pretty soon here. But you also have Baltimore, again, practice session on Tuesday. John Harbaugh spoke to the media after practice and did give some updates, some timelines on some guys, did say that a timeline on the Travis Jones front, someone who I know a lot of people are waiting to kind of hear something else from, is around the 3 to 5 week mark. So honestly, that makes it feel like to me that maybe Travis Jones will start the year on injured reserve. Maybe there's a handshake deal with a veteran that they can maybe sneak a guy like an Aaron Crawford or an Isaiah Mack onto the practice squad or onto the regular season roster, and then maybe once Travis Jones comes back, they could cut him and then get him back on the practice squad. So there's something there with maybe an Aaron Crawford or Isaiah Mack stash on the active roster for now. And then we'll see what happens once Travis Jones comes back. And obviously that doesn't mean he's guaranteed to go on injury reserve. That's just maybe what I'm speculating right now. So it's something to keep in mind. But Jones, again, it's a very, very good thing that this was not a worst case scenario like an ACL tear after he left that game against Arizona. And maybe it does give him an opportunity to see what they have in an Isaiah Mack or an Aaron Crawford on the roster. Obviously, you want to have Travis Jones out there. That's the best case scenario. But you don't want to rush him back either. So if you're really thinking, it's going to be 3 weeks, it might just only be a 1 or 2 game difference if you're looking at the full 5 and you just want to put him on injured reserve to make sure that knee is fully healthy. Because again, Baltimore, I'm sure, does not want to rush these guys back whatsoever. But Harbaugh did talk a bit about Gus Edwards as well, and actually said that he's right on schedule and that they still expect him to play a good amount of football this year. John Harbaugh did say, but that it was kind of right in the range that they thought it was going to be. And it thought that really John Harbaugh was saying a lot of different things, but the main thing I took away and something he said was the fact that he didn't expect and the team didn't expect Gus Edwards to play during the first part of the year. It felt like, and he literally says here, quote, "We did not expect him to be back probably the first part of it." That was really Eric's plan throughout. I'd say that Gus is still on schedule, and I fully expect him to play quite a bit of football this year. So what is the first part of the season? Is that 4 games? Is that the first half of the year? I don't know. But it seemed like this was the outcome Baltimore was expecting, so I'm glad it at least wasn't a total shock to them that maybe Edwards was a bit farther behind a guy like J.K. Dobbins in his recovery. And so those are really good points that Harbaugh makes overall. He also talked a bit about Demarcus Robinson, who we will get to in the second segment, and said, quote, "We've played against him all of these years. He's a big, strong receiver, very strong hands, catch radius. You didn't see it when you guys went in, but he got a really nice seam route off an RPO and just went up and got it. He's learning the offense. He couldn't be in there too much today because he's learning the play still, but he'll pick them up quick. I expect him to play out there on Saturday and get going, so we're happy to have him," end quote. And so, yeah, it's big that the Ravens were able to get a guy like Demarcus Robinson, at least someone who they feel confident in. And it definitely feels like they feel confident in what Demarcus Robinson can bring to the table there. He's a player that I talked about on a previous show last week about, hey, maybe the Ravens will kick the tires on this guy. Was released by the Raiders, and obviously we'll get to him in a few minutes here in the second segment. But somebody who I think overall Baltimore is excited to have. The contract specs did come out on Monday, and it was a $1.035 million deal. You have $895,000 of that guaranteed. So you're kind of thinking, maybe this isn't a situation where it's just a camp body. And honestly, I didn't think that from the jump, but definitely feels like he's going to have a role on this team. And the signing itself feels like Baltimore is excited about it and just gives them another option. Of course, with James Prochet still dealing with something right now, what's his situation? Tyler Wallace just came back from his injuries we talked about. So they're going to have some options there, and it might mean something for these undrafted wide receivers if the Ravens do only end up keeping 5. Right now, the options seem to be Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tyler Wallace, Demarcus Robinson. So does that mean a guy like Shamar Bridges or Mekhi Polk or Riley Webb doesn't get that opportunity, or do the Ravens keep 6 wide out? So tons of wide receiver talk. We're going to continue to get into that in the second segment. Still coming up here on the show, we're going to be diving into Demarcus Robinson a bit more and talking about if he was the right option for Baltimore to sign at the wide receiver position for right now. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about LinkedIn. And as you gear up for the fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. And I've used LinkedIn Jobs for a ton of stuff over the course of my life. You can create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job, the purple hiring frame, to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. You can have simple tools like screening questions to make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience. So you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and who you'd like to hire. That's why small business rates on LinkedIn Jobs is number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen every day. Make sure you check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview starting August 31st, an episode extravaganza. Get ready for the NFL season. The local team experts of the Locked On NFL Podcast Network and Odyssey NFL Insiders all combining into one Ultimate NFL Preview. Again, starting August 31st, search for the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. But let's continue our conversation about Demarcus Robinson, a player that, again, as I talked about in the first segment, Baltimore seems very excited to have in their building. Now, a bit of background on Demarcus Robinson just to start off here. He is a 6'1" receiver. He's about 202 pounds in that range-ish. And he's someone who goes up and plays a lot bigger than his size. And we've talked about that, for example, like a Shamar Bridges. He is a big guy at 6'4". He goes and he plays big. Demarcus Robinson, not quite 6'4", but he still goes up there, makes contested catches. And something we had talked about, just about the profile that Baltimore needed in a wide receiver. If they were going to go purely profile-wise, there were two skill sets that I feel like Baltimore could have really used. And that was, one, a big-bodied contested catch wide receiver, a la Julio Jones, or a speedster to replace some of the speed that they lost in Marquise Brown. So maybe that would be a Will Fuller or someone like that. And so Demarcus Robinson definitely fills the more so contested catch body guy. Again, not the biggest player in the world, but 6'1" still pretty big. It's still a decently sized wide receiver. And he, over the course of his 5-year career, played with the Kansas City Chiefs. That's where he won the Super Bowl with Kansas City. He ends up playing in every single game for the Chiefs. Durable. And we've seen that theme. I tweeted out something yesterday about just the durability theme we've seen for the Ravens. Marcus Williams playing in 76 out of 81 games. Morgan Moses playing in all but one game, and that excludes his rookie season. You have Kyle Fuller playing in all but one game, and now Demarcus Robinson playing in every single game during his NFL career. And over those games, he has caught 145 passes, 1,679 yards, and 14 touchdowns. And a player that, again, didn't cost the Ravens a ton of money. And there are a couple of things that go into this. The question that I posed is, was Demarcus Robinson the right player to sign right now at the wide receiver position for the Ravens? Right now. And I'm going to get to the answer, but I think there are a couple of things we have to talk about first. The money aspect, one, Baltimore likes to go into a season with a lot of, well, not a lot, but at least a bit of money to spend, whether that is for injured players, they have to replace those guys, whether they want to make a trade, another signing. The Demarcus Robinson signing is somebody who, again, is not going to cost them their entire cap space that they have. And it makes them be like, hey, if the Ravens have to replace a guy like Devin Duvernay, or if James Prochet isn't ready and has to miss some time, and it's like a lot of time, or Rashad Bateman goes down, the Ravens don't have to hamstring themselves to a Demarcus Robinson. There are still other opportunities to make moves. Now, the Ravens could obviously free up cap space a ton of other ways. They honestly probably should do that in some aspects just to get more wiggle room. But this wasn't like committing a 2-year, $14 million deal to Will Fuller or something. Or, I don't know, a 2-year, $14 million deal to Odell Beckham, where it's kind of like the Juwan James setup where, I don't know, you're only getting about $800,000 in the first year, but then you get a lot in the second year and go out there and perform with the whole injury situation. So financials is probably one part of it. And also a big part why I think his roster spot is probably guaranteed. Whereas before the specs of the contract came out, this was maybe it's just a camp body type player. I think for what was out there as well, none of these guys are going to be super needle moving options. I think the most needle moving option still available is Will Fuller. You also have guys like T.Y. Hilton, Odell Beckham when he comes back, obviously super, super talented, but just when is that? And we've talked about that before. I think if you're looking at was Demarcus Robinson the best signing they could have made over the past couple months? I say no. I'd raise both Jarvis Landry and Julio Jones as playmakers. And I know Jarvis Landry doesn't fit the big-bodied contested catch guy or the speedster guy. His skill set is a bit redundant based off what they already have, but I think he was that good of a player where they honestly should have probably made a move for him. But that's neither here nor there now. I think there's not really that big of a drop-off from a Will Fuller to a Demarcus Robinson, and they're different players. Like, hey, I would have loved Will Fuller in Baltimore, but at the same time, you have to look at a couple other factors, one of those being the durability factor, which we talked about, Demarcus Robinson playing in every single game. I mean, you look at the guys available, Will Fuller, pretty injury-prone overall, right? You probably miss some games if you're Will Fuller in 2022. T.Y. Hilton, you're probably expecting the same thing there. You're expecting him to miss some games in 2022. Odell Beckham, you know he's probably missing some games in 2022 because he's recovering from that surgery, the ACL injury. So I think that's another factor that the Ravens could have been looking at here. Now, there are other options, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, some of those other players. But again, the Ravens want to take a chance on somebody who they think can make an impact, but not necessarily cost them a ton. And also another thing to keep in mind here is that Demarcus Robinson is not coming in here to be the number one receiver. He's not going to overtake Rashad Bateman and be this 100 catch, 1,000 yard, 10 touchdown guy. That's not even what the Ravens want. Like, obviously it'd be great if you could do that, but you know, it's at what point does he begin taking time away from the young players you want to see so much of, and that the Ravens have freed so much time up and that they've trusted so much in a Rashad Bateman, in a James Prochet, Devin Duvernay, even Tylan Wallace at this point. I think what you have now is potentially a Demarcus Robinson, and this depends on how Tylan Wallace performs, is your number 4 / potentially number 5 guy. I think it's probably a battle between those two for the 4th, 5th jobs, and then, you know, all the Shamar Bridges, etc. So you don't want Demarcus Robinson to cut into James Prochet probably if you're the Ravens, like, completely. You don't want James Prochet to get those inactives every week, which honestly I don't think he'd be getting anyway. But it's the principle of a player where you're not asking him to cut into so much playing time. You're asking him to play a role. It still reminds me of the Seth Roberts signing, where you were still able to showcase some of your talent at the wide receiver position that you wanted to see, that you wanted to develop with real game time snaps, instead of a Jarvis Landry who comes in and becomes a target machine who, you know, would really need the ball in his hands. And that's completely fine. But it goes maybe against what the Ravens have been saying, which is, hey, we trust our guys, we trust our guys, we trust our guys. So it's not the flashiest signing in the world. I'm not saying it's, oh, the Ravens are winning the Super Bowl, they signed Demarcus Robinson, but I also don't think it's a bad move overall, because it's not this like swing for the fences, this is it, this is the only thing they can do signing. Now, if you're really comparing it, I guess Demarcus Robinson and Will Fuller are the two I'd want to put side by side and just like analyze who would be the better fit right now. It does depend what you feel like the Ravens need more. Do the Ravens need speed more, or do they need contested catchability more? And that's a whole nother conversation. But for me personally, I think Will Fuller is the better player. Like, I think when he is healthy and when he is on, he has shown that he is the absolute better player. So from that perspective, was Demarcus Robinson the best player they could sign at the position right now? No. The answer is no for that. But in terms of skill set, if you want to have a player who you've seen on tape do some things and actually play a role on a high-powered Kansas City offense, not that Will Fuller didn't play a role where he was, but I think for what the Ravens need, I personally lean in the direction that they need more contested catchability. That's just me. Some people might say speed. Other people might say contested catch. I'm not mad if you think it's speed, right? I think there is an element where the Ravens do need some more speed, but I'm confident that maybe Devin Duvernay can be that guy, not replacing entirely what Marquise Brown, what they lost there, but could replace enough of it. Whereas contested catch, big-bodied, box the out ability, I think they needed a player that could do that. And with Julio Jones off the market, that was my 1A choice in that category. So with him not there anymore, sure, Demarcus Robinson is a player that definitely fills that mold, and maybe a player that the Ravens didn't expect to be available right now after signing with the Raiders. Now, he was let go by the Raiders because of Jonas Schaefer apparently says that he had a spotty camp, and if that was the case, then you're hoping that he can come in there and have a better camp in Baltimore. But for now, with what I think, was he the best signing a couple months ago? No, he absolutely was not. I think Jarvis Landry was better. Julio Jones was better. Is he the best signing now? From a skill perspective, no. He's not the best signing that they could have made. I think Will Fuller is more, Odell Beckham skills, but that's assuming they're all fully healthy and they can all play. So when you're factoring in durability, was he the best player to sign? Definitely up there. catchability, definitely up there. So I'm not going to say he was the best option they could have signed, but I'm saying that he was a solid option that they could have signed. This is not a bad move for them because also they didn't pay him 5 years, $70 million. This was not a Marcus Williams type signing where they went out there and spent all their cap space and this is it. And that's the only thing they can do. And that's what they're betting on. They can do something else if they want to. They can go out there and make a move. They can acquire somebody else if stuff is not working for him. If the Demarcus Robinson signing backfires in their face, it's okay. It's not ideal. You want it to work. But at the same time, you're kind of thinking to yourself, well, if it doesn't work out, it's a little bit of a sunk cost, but it didn't completely take up every single penny of cap space. So in my opinion, long story short, I think Demarcus Robinson maybe might not have been the absolute best signing from a skill perspective that they could have made, but I think he does fit a role. And in certain aspects, like durability-wise, et cetera, I think he was one of the top options they could have made. And so I'm excited to see what he brings to the table and if he can contribute at a high level or at least a decent level in this Baltimore offense. But we'll head into our final break here on the show here. Still a ton to talk about. We'll talk about mailbag questions, talking about more Demarcus Robinson, rookies, and more. So be sure to stay tuned. We do still have a ton to talk about here on the show. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check on all your betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events in the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find the views and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live and game betting scores and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. And we return here with our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And thank you so much again for making Locked On Ravens your first listen today. Be sure to subscribe here on YouTube and follow along in audio form. But let's now talk about some mailbag questions. And let's pick up right where we left off with a question from Baltimore Wizard, who says, even after the Robinson signing, I still see a need for wide receiver. God forbid Bateman misses any time, but if he, Prochet, or Duvernay miss time, we are so thin that teams will just start doubling money mark. The front office needs to support Lamar a bit more. And so this is what I was talking about a little bit in terms of like, this is not the be all end all of the position. If the Ravens feel like they have to do something else, then they can do something else. And Demarcus Robinson is not your number one receiver. He is your 4/5 guy in this offense. But yeah, the same principle that we were talking about definitely still applies. If Rashad Bateman goes down, that is obviously like disaster case number one. Don't want that. Don't need that whatsoever if you're the Ravens. But it's the same thing with Devin Duvernay and James Prochet. If guys begin to get dinged up and miss a week or two here or there, and you're starting to call up young guys from the practice squad, you're getting really thin. Plus, Demarcus Robinson instantly becomes the oldest wide receiver in that room at 27 years old. He turns 28 in September. You're still relying on decently young players. This is not like a 10-year veteran who is, seen the world at the NFL level or anything. So, yeah, I mean, look, is wide receiver completely not a need anymore because the Ravens signed Demarcus Robinson? No. I mean, it is still a need. It definitely still is. I think Baltimore, maybe at the trade deadline, should probably poke around options depending on how it all plays out. But I do want to give it a chance. It's almost like with the young guys. People want to give the young guys a chance first. I mean, look, give Demarcus Robinson a chance first. If he's not doing anything by the time the trade deadline rolls around, then sure, I think Baltimore should probably look. Maybe there's also a player that's cut, Darius Slayton potentially from the Giants, and they're able to go out and get him, and then stuff changes a bit. So no, I don't think that just because the Ravens signed Demarcus Robinson, the wide receiver need completely goes away, but you're kind of thinking about what this team can do with the players they have. I think they now have every skill set at least a bit covered, so I want to see how it plays out for them. But another question here from Baltimore Wizard is, of the preseason rookies, who is your player for each category? Biggest disappointment, and then he says Kyle Hamilton / Linderbaum. Biggest surprise, Isaiah Likely. Rookie outperforming in their draft spot, Pepe Williams. Rookie excited to see him regular season, Travis Jones. Biggest question mark, Jalen Armour-Davis. So, all right, I'll go through the list here. Biggest disappointment, I feel like everybody's done something in the preseason. I mean, I guess I'll say Tyler Beatty, and even he's not a disappointment. Like, he's looked good. He looked a lot better against Arizona, but the yards per carry average isn't quite there. He hasn't really had a ton of big runs, and I know he got the most run out of the running backs in that week 2 game, but even so, like, he caught a pass for a touchdown. He looked good. I mean, sure, if you want to say Kyle Hamilton based off of where he was picked and kind of the ups and downs he's had, sure, like, I get it, but I still think he's done enough to where I don't classify him as a disappointment. I guess for me, the biggest disappointment has honestly been the guys who have been injured, and that's no fault of their own. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming them or anything, But, I want to see him out there. I want to see Tyler Linderbaum or Jalen Armour-Davis and some of those, obviously David Ojabo too. But it's been, I'd say, disappointing not to see those guys out on the field is what I'll say there. Biggest surprise, I'll say, yeah, probably Isaiah Likely, based off just how much he's dominated. Not that I ever questioned his skills or ability, but he's been out of this world. I expected it to come for Isaiah Likely. I didn't expect it this fast is what I'd say. I didn't expect whatever he's doing now, which is just incredible. I mean, he 8 targets and 8 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown on 15 snaps. That is unbelievable. So yeah, definitely surprised with how much Isaiah Likely has done well, but I wasn't shocked that he could do it, right? I definitely think he had that in him the whole time. I just maybe expected a bit more of an adjustment period, but he's come in here and said, you know what, look, I'm this guy now. I can do this. Put me in this offense and give me a big role, and I am all here for it. So very happy with Isaiah Likely. Rookie outperforming their draft spot, Pepe Williams. I'm going to give this to Likely too. I mean, there's not so much of a drop-off between Likely and Williams, and I think Likely has had the far better preseason. Not that Pepe Williams hasn't had a good preseason, but it is very hard to put into words is how good Isaiah Likely has been. You could even put Travis Jones in this conversation too, because he was honestly a early second, even late first round pick in some people's books here. He was a second round pick in my book for sure. And he was just dominant all over the place. Absolutely dominant. So I'll say Isaiah Likely / Travis Jones for this one. Rookie, excited to see in regular season. I'm going to say Kyle Hamilton. I'm very excited to see what he can do alongside of Chuck Clark and Marcus Williams in that Ravens secondary, Marlon Humphrey, hopefully Marcus Peters there as well. I'm excited to see how the Ravens utilize him. Now, Mike McDonald deploys him because he's such a big physical safety, someone who just has all these traits and all this ability. So for him in particular, he's somebody who I'm super excited to see. But honestly, all of them, there's not one player that I'm not excited to see out of this class because I think it really was so good and they all have the opportunity to contribute at a really high level early on. And the biggest question mark, I'd say Jalen Armour-Davis is one of them. Maybe Tyler Linderbaum too, just because we haven't seen him in the preseason yet. But I'm not as concerned about his translation over to the NFL game. Maybe for Jalen Armour-Davis, maybe just what his role is. Where is he going to play? Where are his spots? Is it more special teams? Is he going to get some run on the outside? So I agree. I'll say Jalen Armour-Davis for this one. Our next question comes from Archangel, who says, any indications that Ronnie Stanley and Marcus Peters will be put on the PUP list? And I assume this means the reserve one, so it means they'd miss the first 4 games like Gus Edwards did on Tuesday. And no indication yet. I mean, if Baltimore really felt like they had to do that, they would have on Tuesday instead of cutting a guy. So it's definitely good news that for at least Ronnie Stanley's case, Marcus Peters is off of the list. So that really isn't that relevant anymore. But for Stanley in particular, it's good news they didn't put him on the PUP list, or at least the reserve one like Gus Edwards. I'm hoping to see him back. That injury was just so brutal, and you really hope he's able to recover fully from it, because when he's on the field, he is their best offensive lineman by a very wide margin. He is that good, and it really helps them out overall. So I'm hoping, and obviously for Stanley State too, just to get him healthy for his sake is really, really important to me also. So, Ryan Stanley, friend of the show, obviously a super nice guy off the field and obviously very dominant on it. So rooting for him definitely. Next question here, though, we have from Afi DeFoy, who says, hello, Kevin. Besides left guard, is there any other position with no sure starter? Thanks again for the show and have a nice day. Well, as always, thank you so much for your question. You have a nice day too. And left guard is definitely the one that, if you're thinking starter, it's really the only position I can think of right now that does have a clear vacancy. And the word starter, what is a starter? It's kind of lost its meaning over these past couple of years in the NFL. For anywhere other than the offensive line and quarterback and other positions like fullback, etc., maybe tight, there are still there's meaning to the starter position. Like you say starter, you're a starter. It's a real thing, but at the same time, guys just rotated in so much that the word starters lost its meaning, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I think if you're talking about a starter, the left guard position is definitely the one. And then assuming Ronnie Stanley isn't healthy, which I don't want to, I want to assume he is, but if Ronnie Stanley isn't healthy, then the left tackle position, that's probably going to go to Juwan James, but again, you never know there. So the left side of the offensive line is where I'm monitoring there personally. And then finally, we have a question from Gurus81, who says, what are your thoughts on middle linebacker besides Queen and Bynes? Harrison has flashed in the preseason, but Ross was a one-man wrecking crew in Glendale. Is Welch a lock due to special teams experience? How many do you see them carrying? And this is a really interesting question, and one I've talked about before on the show. my thought on the inside linebacker position is Baltimore doesn't need to keep many. I think your 3 locks at this point are Patrick Queen, Malik Harrison, and Josh Bynes. I think Harrison's looked very good this preseason. Has had a couple of not so great plays, but I think the positives right now far outweigh the negatives. I think that Baltimore wouldn't shock me if they keep just 4 guys, and it wouldn't shock me if Josh Ross is that guy. I agree. Josh Ross has been very, very good. I mean, against Arizona was incredible and had some really nice moments against the Titans as well. My initial pick, which was Kobe McLean, I don't really see that anymore. And for Kristen Welch, I mean, I don't think his special teams experience makes him a lock. I think it helps in the grand scheme of things, but I don't think it makes him a pure lock. So for me, I think my 4 right now are Patrick Queen, Josh Bynes, Malik Harrison, and Josh Ross. And the reason I think that is because the Ravens, they can use their safeties in the box. They can put Chuck Clark there. They can put Kyle Hamilton there, Tony Jefferson if you need to. They don't have to have 2 inside linebackers on the field at all times. They can use 1 linebacker, 1 safety. Or they can use all these 6DB packages. They don't have to use so many inside linebackers. So if the Ravens want to keep an extra defensive back over an extra inside linebacker, I think that helps. But special teams is important. I think the Ravens will consider that. But for now, again, my 4, Queen, Bynes, Harrison, and Ross are my guys. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.